What is up, everybody? I'm No Lex Given, and today, with the premiere of the Gambit game, I thought it would be a fun time to share the story of the first time I participated in an online reality game. During 2020, I quickly became completely obsessed with the Korean reality competition TV series, The Genius. It's got awesome technical strategy, epic blindsides and betrayals, and always ends with an amazing twist. And this story does not disappoint. This is the Reddit post that I saw and applied to be a participant in the Genius Battle of Wits. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into because I'd never done anything like this before, and the first 13 people that applied wound up getting accepted, which included myself. And there might be some red flags here, but I was excited to jump in there and have some fun. The first trial was trading rock, paper, scissors, which I'll break down here briefly. Each player was given one of these 13 different decks containing rock, paper, and scissors in some combination, as you can see. And we didn't know who had which deck, we just knew the 13 different decks that were available. From there, we could play rock, paper, scissors games with each other using the cards that we had, and if you win in an individual game of rock, paper, scissors, you give your opponent your card. Whoever has the least cards in their hand at the end of the game is the winner, and whoever has the most is the loser. Pretty straightforward game. However, there is one other rule. When you tie with someone, you both keep your cards. If you tie with scissors, or if you tie with paper. However, a rock tie eliminates both rocks from the game, and both players then are down a card, putting them one step closer to victory. So there's a lot of different ways to play this game right off the rip. You could just try to play games of rock, paper, scissors against your fellow competitors and hope to win and get rid of some of your cards. However, if you do that and don't win, then you've just made whoever you just made lose kind of angry. So if you're going to go that route, you need to make sure that you're going to be able to win, because the game is very socially based, the entirety of the concept of the Genius. But this game in particular literally asks you to directly betray people and then make them the loser. And that's never where you want to be in the Genius, in my opinion, is betraying the person that actually loses the game, because then they're gonna have a grudge and they're gonna know exactly who to take it out on. So what I really saw as the strategy for this game is to try to find other players that have rocks and just battle those rocks against each other, cancel them out, and then at the very least, you won't lose. The only problem with this is I had deck number 3, which isn't the absolute worst deck, but is definitely far from being the best. I put these decks in 3 different categories, basically. Some of the players had 2 rocks and were gonna have a pretty easy time. Some of the players had 1 rock. They just have to find one other player that has one other rock, and then they can trade off and neither of them will be able to lose. Then there are players with 0 rocks, with me down on the bottom, and our only real chance of survival is to try to team up with one of those players with 2 rocks and trade some cards around, so that way we can both end the game with 2 cards and not lose. But it's tricky as a 0 rock player, because you've got to find somebody that's in a really advantageous position and just kind of convince them to do a mediocre and boring play so that you can survive. And that's what I first started trying to do. I found one player named Chargestone that was a 2 rock player, but didn't really seem like he wanted to give them up. Charge had partnered with another 2 rock player, and it looked like they were going to try to go for the win. I tried to persuade them, but they didn't really seem keen on it, which put me in a bad position, and I said to them, listen, you're gonna make me lose this game, so you better win. And then I wound up talking to a bunch of different One Rock players, and there wasn't really too many ways that I could interact with them. I did also find some other fellow Zero Rock players. Again, there's nothing we can do unless we really just want to save our own skin by betraying someone this early. And it's not the position that I really wanted to be in, but I will do it if there's no other option. I was able to link up two other players that both had One Rock decks. One had deck 5 and one had deck 12, and I said, listen, you guys, I can't work with either of you, but you should work with each other, and that did kind of help to build bonds with both of those players, but didn't help me in this game. Those two guys were named Nick and Craig, and we'll continue to talk about those two. I'm going to build alliances with those in future games, but for right now, that was basically all I could do with them. Then something kind of interesting happened. I started talking to a player named Mario, who also claimed to have deck 12. At first, I thought one of these two players has to be lying to me, but then it turned out it was actually an error made by the person hosting this Genius Org. So they cleared that up, and Mario actually received deck 11 instead, and now had 2 rocks. And now being in this power position, I said, all right, well, Mario, you want to work with me? And I was able to trade and move some things around with Mario so that I could survive this match. There was one other error in this game that I want to talk about just for context. It's not really to throw shade. This is just a volunteer amateur thing. The person running it was probably a younger kid and had never done anything like this before, so some mistakes are going to happen. I just want to bring them up just because they do wind up being relevant to the game overall. But Chargestone wound up winning. They got rid of their rocks with someone that they had teamed up with, and 2 people didn't get rid of any cards at all and ended the game with 3 cards. So initially, the host said that those 2 people were just both going to go to the duel. That's not actually how the game is supposed to work. Whoever loses is supposed to have some sort of agency in who they are choosing, and Chargestone is actually supposed to pick one of those 2 players to initially be the main loser, and then that player picks the other one. Now, Charge did wind up having to pick one, and that's part of what I wanted when I brought up this error to the host, that Charge should have to make a decision here at the cost of his win. There should be some amount of social capital that you sacrifice in order to grab that win. So I was happy to see that corrected, but yeah, just kind of have to know about the context there. The person that got selected as the loser wound up picking the other person too. So they both wind up going to the deathmatch, and it's the same end result. Just wanted to throw in those additional details. This game's very straightforward. Both players each have a separate scoring zone that the other player can't see, and they place their game piece inside of it. At the same time, you make a guess to where your opponent is going to place their piece for either 1, 2, or 3 points. If you guess correctly, you get the points, and if you guess incorrectly, then your opponent gets the points. This is repeated 10 times over the course of 10 rounds, both players each playing and guessing. And if it looks familiar, this sort of 3-lane setup, trying to guess where your opponent might play to, well, there's a reason that I really enjoy Marvel Snap. It really embodies this kind of psych element of trying to guess where your opponent is going to play for different payoffs and rewards. I want to point out as well how fun it is to just feel out the vibes of the other players in the cast, because the game is incredibly social. This was all done over Discord, and there were players in the first match that reached out to me, and when they did that, I was like, you know, they're probably reaching out to everybody. And turns out that wasn't actually the case, but I was definitely going to base who I trusted most on game action. Somebody had to do something in game. Words are just whatever. You could be saying those same words to everybody. Last thing I'll say about the first game, there were also ways to earn garnets from just winning games of rock, paper, scissors, and I did dumb it down a little bit more than what actually happened. If you're interested in the full rules to the game, I'll leave a link to that in the video description, but we got a lot to cover. Moving into the second main match, I thought there was a way to create a nice alliance with people that had worked together in the previous main match. So we had myself and Mario, there was another group of 2, Beans and Cam, and then Nick and Craig that I brought up. So that was a nice little group of 6, though the second game called for 5 people to win. There was just a really good strategy that worked for 5 people. So the plan was to have Nick be a mole and work alongside Chargestone and his group while we all optimize together. And this game is basically just an optimization game. There's different things that you can buy that contribute to points, and you have to score the most points by the end using your resources as best as you can. There were different specific rules that made it so that you had to work as a team with other players. You could only buy an item for yourself once, and you could buy an item for any other player in the game 1 time each as well. So by creating a group of 5, we were then able to each buy each other 1 item, each buy ourselves 1 item, and score the maximum total number of points. It was a relatively straightforward game. I will say Mario and I butted heads a little bit because there were also like really flashy items that you could buy. The game was all about purchasing fruit for you and your friends, though you could also buy worms for players and try to eat the fruit of opposing players. But the ratio of how much you had to spend versus how much it might even potentially be able to disrupt those players, I just didn't feel was worth it. It also can make people angry, and I don't think that that's a good thing, so I just tried to get us the most points as possible and didn't really go for any of the flashy but overcosted choices. This game was also not without its errors, and we partially knew about the errors thanks to Nick, who was acting as a mole on the other team, but basically the other team kind of just misinterpreted one of the rules, and the host never corrected them on this misinterpretation, so we were able to pretty easily win with our group of 5 because of that miscommunication. All the games kind of had confusing rules documents and everything wasn't explained super thoroughly, but again, that's kind of what you're getting for signing up to an org like this. There is also a lot of issues with like the scoreboard, which was supposed to update each round, and the end of match garnet counts were all out of whack. We do wind up getting some additional dealers to help out before the next main match, so that's definitely going to just ease a lot of those tensions, but definitely a lot of errors as we kind of get into things here. Our group was able to win, like I said, as a group of 5, so we were all immune, and Nick wasn't the one that lost, nor was he selected to go to the death match. There's a player named Eric that lost because he was kind of on the outs and couldn't really work his way into either of the groups, and they wound up selecting and eliminating Mel, one of the people in Chargestone's group. The death match for episode 2 was actually the same one that was used in episode 1, so that game was repeated again. I won't break that down one more time, but you've already seen it before. This third game is pretty simple. I'll break it down in a second, but it is a minority game, which I learned is a genre of games, and I actually learned it, Chargestone told me, to check out the start of Liar Game, which is a manga that the genius is sort of maybe loosely based off of. It's like a Squid Game type of genre where the players play tactical strategy games rather than the childhood games that are played in Squid Game. So here's the concept of the game. Again, very straightforward. There's 2 jars. Each round, you have to place either a blue marble or a red marble in either of those jars. If the color of the marble that you put into the jar is the lesser represented marble in that jar, then you score points for the round. Pretty simple, but it's difficult to cooperate with an alliance in this game because You want to actually be in the minority of players for any given decision. The way that this plays out in the manga is that one player makes a group of, in this instance, we'll say 4 players, and he says to the other 3 players, I'm gonna put a red marble into jar A. You put a blue marble into jar A, you put a blue marble into jar B, and you put a red marble into jar B. Then, regardless of what happens, if we all split up, one of us will be in the minority, which in theory sounds like a pretty good idea. But then that same player goes to another group of 3 players and says the same thing. You put one there, you put one there, you put one there, I'm gonna do this. So now everybody else is stacking up and that player gets to be the only one in the minority. So this game is very interesting because it actually really requires you to basically screw over the players that you are cooperating with. There were some players still that tried to use this exact same strategy that's used in the Liar game, though we kind of knew what was going on because we knew what the concept of the game was, and we also still had Nick as a mole. So with that, we were able to just have a lot of information. There wasn't a way to grab like a full joint win with everybody, but we were able to make it so that Beans and Cam won, as well as one of the players from Charge's alliance. Because we had a group of 6 plus a whole bunch of insider information, we were able to control the game enough to make it so that Eric wasn't immune. And because Eric was still kind of on the outs, he wound up getting picked to go to the deathmatch yet again by someone from Charge's group. This was the deathmatch for round 3, anti-chess, and I wasn't familiar with anti-chess going into the game, so it was still a brand new game to me and something that I kind of had to figure out, but it is an actual game and you can play it and it's pretty cool. I don't actually have that much familiarity with actual chess. I played it as a kid. I never really played it competitively or seriously, so I don't really know any openings or any strategies. So anti-chess really leveled the playing field for me because even though I wasn't playing in it, it could have leveled the playing field for somebody like me. And I think that that's part of what the Genius is about. Though a lot of people do know how to play anti-chess and it is kind of like a solvable game, I'm pretty rusty. I will say that 2 years ago, while I was competing in BOW, after seeing that that first death match was repeated, I didn't know if any other death matches were gonna get repeated. So I started to play a bunch of anti-chess. Let's see how well I'll do. I don't know if I explained the rules yet. So in anti-chess, if you can take a piece, you have to. That is the main rule, and you win the game by losing, I think, all of your pieces. I'm pretty sure that's how you win, and we'll see. I don't really remember exactly what it is that I am meant to do here, but I think that it's going to start off with something like this. So I will move here, and then my opponent has to take me. Now on this turn, I could make any move that I want in the game. However, my opponent, they're gonna have to take some stuff with their queen, and they're also going to have to take some stuff with their bishop. So I'm not sure exactly what I want to do. I don't remember, like I said, I used to play this a lot a long time ago. I'm gonna try something like this, and then we could take this with the rook, or we could take this with the knight. I know one thing that's really important is getting your opponent's queen out, so I'm gonna take this with the rook because otherwise, if I just took it with the knight, I would then have to take my opponent's queen this turn, and then my opponent would be in a advantageous position where I don't have any forced moves. But now I can still do this, and if they take this rook, I think that things get a little bit awkward for me, but if they don't, then I think we might be in an okay spot. So, maybe I was okay regardless. Here is where things get a little bit interesting, because what I think I would like to do is force my opponent to take this rook, and then I don't have to worry about being like battling on 2 different fronts right now. So I'm gonna go for this. Then my opponent will be forced to move their rook into mine, and then I can kind of make them take some other pieces here potentially. We can move this queen to this position. That's probably good. Now there's 3 different things that have to take it, so my opponent does have some options here. But we can make that work. And now here's where things are going to peter out a little bit. So I haven't played this perfectly for sure. And that could get a little bit scary pretty quickly. What if we do this? Okay, that's not too terrible. Now my opponent has to take this. And then... okay, they moved with their knight. So now I can make them take this pawn. And then they'll be forked here. They'll have to take both of these pawns. So that allows me to potentially set up some tempo on the board. And what I think I'm going to do... okay, here's the tricky part. If my opponent takes this pawn, I'll have to take with this rook. And then my opponent actually has a free move where they can make me start taking their pieces. So I don't want to open that up just yet. I'm not sure. We're totally taking a break from the whole org as I just try to relearn and reteach anti-chess here, but it's kind of a cool game. I think one move that looks pretty interesting is if we do this. No, that's tricky because then my opponent could take this pawn and then I would have to take them back. So maybe there's just not going to be a way around this. I'm going to try this. This will put me in a position where, yeah, now I can go like this, and now my opponent has to take with their knight. Now I can make them take my... oh, do I have to take this? No, I don't think I do. No, yeah. So now my opponent has to take this, or they have to take my king or my rook here. And that seems good to me. Right now they have to take this, 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 and I'm just trying to line up something where the rook will basically have to take everything. That's kind of the idea right now. So let's start... I'm not going to be able to do the math here exactly. Maybe I could just move this here. That's probably pretty safe. Their rook will have to come down, and then... sure. Okay, I think we can make this work here. Yeah, I found it. So now we do this. Then we do this. And that is a win, as my opponent will have to claim all of my pieces there. So there's anti-chess. And there is, that's it. That was deathmatch 3. So Eric was able to win that deathmatch again and make it to another round. Go, Eric. Good job. But there were still some errors this main match, just in terms of like the organization. I mentioned that some additional dealers were brought on to help out, and I was really thankful for them. They were able to get like the garnet count situated and make sure that the points weren't totally all over the place. There was just a little bit of lack of communication in terms of what information was supposed to be revealed each round. All that we were supposed to know after each round was how many of each colored marble were in each jar. Instead, sometimes we were told less than that, just the total number of marbles in each jar. Sometimes we were told exactly which players played exactly which marbles in both jars, so that was still a little bit all over the place, but still a pretty fun experience. The important thing is that the garnet issues were all corrected, so I didn't have to worry about that anymore and could just focus on the game, because the host would be like, okay, do you guys notice anything wrong with the garnets? But there's so much like hidden information in the Genius that it's impossible to really know if there's an error, and you actually use the garnets to help determine what happened in the game sometimes. So that was a little bit confusing, and the dealers were now able to correct all of that stuff and get that in line. Then also during the fourth game, there was a period where the host was just unable to run things just for some personal reasons. So the dealers were really able to step up and allow the next game to just run totally smoothly, which super thankful for that. This fourth game was a team-based game, and if you are familiar with the game 2 Rooms and a Boom, we basically just played that. Again, I actually wasn't familiar with this game, and Chargestone yet again filled me in. They know a lot about a lot of different games, and I was kind of just finding my way into the org community. But the basic gist of this game was 2 Rooms and a Boom. It is a hidden role game where there is a good team and an evil team. I'll break down the 2 different teams here just so that way you can kind of tell what was going on. Myself and Mario were both on the evil team along with Craig. Also on the evil team was Chargestone and one of Charge's closest allies. The good team consisted of Beans, Cam, and Nick, and it's important to note that both Beans and Cam we allowed to win the previous marble game. And then rounding out that team, we have Stuff, who is probably Chargestone's main ally. That was who Charge won the very first game with, as well as Eric. The game was going very, very well for the evil team to kick things off. However, part of the tricky thing with this game is that there's 2 rooms, and when you weren't in the same room as someone, well, then you weren't allowed to talk to them. And in the second round, Mario and I had gotten split up. And it's important to note, I think a little bit, I'm somewhat controlling and I like to take a leadership position. I had definitely been telling Mario what to do for a lot of this process, and we were definitely very close allies, but there was a part where I would just say like, okay, Mario, submit this, and then he would do it. And when we were not in the same rooms as each other, Mario just failed to submit for the round, which actually put the evil team in kind of an awkward situation. And then we were bailed out by both Cam and Beans, which were on the good team, but they were confident that they wouldn't get brought to the deathmatch even if they lost. So they decided to kind of play for the evil team and covertly keep the evil team safe going into the next game. So things definitely got a little bit awkward there, but that's the importance of allies in the Genius. I'm gonna try to break down some of the social dynamics real quick to explain why Cam and Beans were so willing to throw this game. If the evil team wins, our alliance is still in the majority on that team. We've got myself, Mario, and Craig. So we will be able to determine if there is a vote who the first duelist is from the good team, and we just won't pick Cam, Beans, or Nick from the other team. And from the good team, we do technically have a majority too. We're 6 players out of the 10 total left in the game, but Nick is kind of still acting as a spy to help us get more information. So we just felt it was safer to have the evil team win, and from there, we choose Stuff, who was Charge's closest ally, and Stuff decided to play against Eric. The fourth deathmatch, again, was anti-chess, and we kind of thought this might be coming with the first deathmatch repeating once. The second one did as well, and that's why basically all of the players were practicing it. And it's kind of a fine line. You want to practice it because you want to get better at it. I was not familiar with the game at all, but in practicing it with other people that were in the org, you do kind of raise your threat level a little bit. So that can be a little bit tricky, but I wanted to, I played a bunch of games with Cam. She was my main anti-chess partner, and then I did play, I think, 1 game with Mario, though we never actually finished it. Once you get to the end game in anti-chess, as you saw, like, one player's moves are just totally telegraphed. So I think there were like 6 moves still left to go in my game with Mario where he just knew that I won and we didn't bother playing it out. I mean, it was obvious that I had won the game, but I didn't know how to like clear that off of my Lichess profile or anything, so it just wound up staying there for a while. I do want to talk about some other problems that kind of came up during this game. There was one instance where one of the players just made a really good move if they were allowed to just eliminate one of the players from the game, and they eliminated just randomly, by blind luck, blandly, the ideal target. And there were some questions that came up after that of like, could the person be cheating? Could they be using multiple Discord accounts? You know what? It was Megumi, who was the evil player that was on our team that was closely associated with Chargestone. They just happened to make a good move. I don't believe there was any weird stuff going on with this, but people do cheat sometimes, and orgs kind of takes out the whole purpose of the whole thing. But because of that and players' concerns around it, after that, the ability to spectate this org was severely limited. So typically there's other people's, and they've got other people on the server, and they have access to all of the different channels. After this game, a lot of that stuff was shut down just to make sure that everything was above board. There is another weird thing too. Mario became Mario Man. For whatever reason, Mario lost access to his Discord account and had to make a new one and rejoin the server with that. So now their new name was Mario Man on the server. If you hear me say Mario Man at any point after this, pretty straightforward, but I'm still referring to Mario, just in his new incarnation. Eric was again able to come out on top and make it into the final 9. So now moving into the final 9, it basically became 7 versus 2. Because people from Charge's group kept dueling Eric, he kind of became the 7th member of our group. And after reading the rules for the 5th game, I noticed there was a way to split it with a 7-person win, meaning that then Charge would have to go to the duel with his closest ally. The 5th game was sort of an optimization game with elements from a minority game of sorts. You had to buy a hat, a shirt, pants, and shoes. And I'll leave the full rules in the video description if you want to check it out. It was kind of complicated. The prices of the items fluctuated based off how many people were shopping for various items. And there were also items called gambler's items, which you didn't know the price of before you bought them, and they were either really cheap or the most expensive. Because we had so many players and prices of items were dependent on how many players were trying to buy a given thing, we actually had a lot of control over the prices. All we didn't know about was these gambler's items, which we could use garnets to purchase clues about, and we were also able to basically control those garnet auctions because we were 7 of the 9 players remaining in the game. So because we'd also been winning a bunch of games, Charge and Megumi didn't really have that many garnets to work with. So we were basically able to control the auction by low bidding. They wouldn't really be able to bid at all, and then we would just share the clues amongst each other. That said, the clues didn't really make any sense after we purchased them. They were kind of like, you know those logic puzzles where like Steve can't sit next to Jason, but Jason needs to sit to the right of Tom, and once you have all of the clues, then things start to make some sense. That was kind of how it worked, but if you remember me complaining about some of the vague wording leading up to this point, I really didn't trust the wording of any of these clues, even after we had earned them. Mario did, and Mario thought he had a hunch on what we could do to act on these clues, so he decided to go for it, and he was correct in doing so. I didn't really want to do it, but he went for it. And it paid off that he was able to get the gambler's pants for only $1. I kind of didn't want to do this because it was risky and didn't really have any real payoff, but Mario went ahead with it anyways, and there was still a way that we could figure out to make all 7 of us win, which would be great. And I felt like there was no reason not to go for. And then Mario Man went rogue. He made a play just to pull out a little bit more ahead of the rest of us, which all that did is make his 6 alliance members non-immune, so that way they could get taken to the death match. And it didn't change who was going to lose. Megumi was still going to lose regardless, and now it just meant that they could pick any of the 6 of us to battle against. So I don't really know why Mario did it. He gave some justifications. Maybe it was that I was too controlling. Maybe he was just bored because of that and wanted to play. I brought up that he always really liked the different splashy items and the different ways that you could kind of mess with other people in the game, whereas I was just trying to build tight allies and keep my numbers strong throughout. And I was doing a great job at that, I felt. And I also felt that Mario was like in the center of that too. Mario had worked with me in every single match from round 1. So I don't really know why he did this to kind of just put me immune, but I blew up at him. I said, screw off, lose my number, don't talk to me ever again. He would try to like private message me and I'd be like, nah, I don't want to hear it. You're dead to me. And there's a lot of like interesting social applications of being so obviously visibly mad at somebody. There is one thing in the immediate that I thought maybe it would mean that Megumi wouldn't pick me because I wanted to make it clear that my sights were set on Mario. At the same time, it was pretty obvious that I was kind of controlling my group of 7 and that things might start to fall apart even more if I was taken out of the game. So I was an obvious choice for the deathmatch where I would have to prove my worth. This game is black and white. It's taken right from the Genius, and the rules are pretty simple. Both players have 9 tiles, and the game is played over 9 rounds. Tiles are numbered 0 to 8, with the even-numbered tiles being black and the odd-numbered tiles being white. The goal is both players play 1 tile each round, and whoever wins more rounds wins the deathmatch. The game is almost purely psychological in trying to predict which tile your opponent is going to play. There are some tactics involved as well, because you can kind of get a rough idea of what your opponent might have played based off of the color that they played. So each round, one player plays their tile first, and then the other player responds with their tile. And since I didn't lose the main match, I decided to go first on the very first round of the game. And I believe that this is correct. It allows me to go second on the penultimate round, which is potentially a big decision round. The final round, both players will just play their last tile, so there's no real decisions to be made there. So that's why I elected to go first. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say what happened in the game from like the audience perspective, so that way you can follow along. And then I'm going to replay the game and I'm going to further break down what my actual plays were. So to start things off, I played a white tile and Megumi played a black tile and I won. In the second round, Megumi played a white tile and I played a black one and lost. So now it is tied up 1-1. For the third round, I played a white tile, Megumi played a black one, I lost. Then Megumi played a white one, I played a white one as well, and I lost again. So now I am down 1-3. I played a black tile, Megumi also played a black tile, and I lost again. So now if I lose just one more round, I am done. I am out of the Genius. Cue the Extreme Ways music. I'm not done yet. Megumi plays a black tile, which I respond to with a black tile and win. Then I play my last white tile. All Megumi needs is one win. If she has the 8, 8 will always beat a white tile. But she doesn't have it, so I win again. Then Megumi plays a black tile, and I finish off the game by playing a black tile to win before we both play our last cards, and I play a black card to Megumi's white tile and take the victory. It was close, but I was able to come back in the end. The game is purely psychological and really comes down to predicting what you think your opponent is willing to do. There's also a little bit of interesting history with this game because it has been played on the actual show The Genius a number of times. So those games are kind of canon in terms of what players might be expected to do and then how you could potentially deviate from those strategies. I decided to lead with 5, right in the middle, with the idea being this will give me the most potential information, because if my opponent plays on one side or the other, I'm able to cut what potential pieces they may have played in half. And I kind of felt like Megumi might do the same thing and potentially start off with either a 2 or a 4. Probably still leaning on the lower side of things as not wanting to give up one of her best cards just yet, but also potentially still a 4 as playing to the middle will allow them to get the most information. And I felt like 5 was a really nice way to bait out a 4, which is really important. When you win, you want to just barely win. You want your 5 to beat their 4. You want your 3 to beat their 2, etc. That means that you're using your pieces as efficiently as possible. On the flip side of things, when you lose, you want to lose big. When your opponent plays their 8, you want to play their 0. 8 is going to beat your piece regardless. So you want it to beat one of your terrible pieces that didn't really have a shot at winning. So that was kind of the logic going through my head. And also there's just a lot of psychological elements to consider. Once somebody loses, I feel like they are then more likely to try to play a higher valued piece, so that way they don't fall too far behind. Something that I clearly didn't care about. On the second game, I played my 0 into whatever Megumi had played there, and knowing that I was going to play a 0, I knew that Megumi's piece would be bigger than mine as a white piece regardless. So I initially just immediately threw away my 0 so that way I wouldn't have to deal with it. After I got rid of my 0, I make probably the biggest gamble of the game. I lead off with my 1. Now, if Megumi still has her 2 and can respond with it, that would be pretty bad. But they lost to my white piece previously, so I think that this made Megumi play a 6 here to try to grab the lead. Then Megumi played another white piece, and from here, already having played 2 of my own white pieces, I kind of decided I wanted to try to get rid of them. That way I would be giving out the least amount of information as possible in the later stages of the game. So here I play my 3, I lose again, but I'm still feeling pretty good. I then lead off with my 2, so now I've basically gotten rid of all of my low pieces at this point in the game, and Megumi, trying to seal the nail in my coffin, I think uses a pretty high piece, thinking that I might be raising my own pieces in order to try to stabilize. So now down 4-1, there are a few things that I know for sure. Because I've played all of my low pieces and have been losing, I know that Megumi still has her 0 that she's hanging on to. And I also know that I can't lose another game. And Megumi knows that I can't lose another game. So the question is, can she go for the win at some point? And when? I don't think it's going to be now though, when Megumi has to play her first card. So to this black card, I just figured it was probably Megumi getting rid of her 0, and I play my lowest card, which at this point is a 4. At this point, I think Megumi's best card is probably 6, so I lead with my 7, which basically confirms this, because Megumi could either tie with her own 7, or she could just win with her 8, but she isn't able to do either of those things, which leaves me with my 6 and my 8 going into the last 2 turns of the game. When she plays a black card, I'm really only concerned that it's potentially a 6. I don't think that it could possibly be an 8 at this point, so I don't have anything to worry about there. So playing my 8 is actually really great here and means that I will beat a 6 regardless, and then my 6 on the final turn of the game will be able to clean it up and beat anything 5 or lower. So that's it. It got a little bit close, but I wasn't sweating it. I was still confident basically the whole time. It does definitely get a little bit nerve-wracking, and I was super grateful just to have the experience of a deathmatch under my belt. I could kind of scare other people away. Even though the game was 4-5, it didn't really seem close because I was just in no jeopardy of losing all through those final rounds. Main match 6 was Avalon, the Resistance. This is a really cool social deduction game that, again, I actually had never played before, and Chargestone once again filled me in on, but I've definitely become a really big fan of this game since. Part of the cool thing about the Genius format, though, is this game wasn't just Avalon, and it was just totally Avalon, but it's Avalon with all of these weeks of built-up social dynamics. I hate Mario. I kind of respect Chargestone enough that I want to get him out. Now people are starting to see me more of a threat, and just makes the game so much more complicated and so much more fun. I was still really upset with Mario at this point. I just treated him super hostilely whenever he tried to approach me about like, oh, people won't think we're working together now, so maybe we should work together. I was just like, screw off, man. I just had to play in the deathmatch because of you. I did kind of want to intimidate Mario a little bit, so I sent him the Lee chess game that he had unfinished a few main matches previous to that, and he kind of was like confused because he said he couldn't play on the game, so I don't know if he was like using a different device or something like that was up, but he was like, it looks like black is going to win. Like, he didn't even remember the game. So yeah, I didn't wind up playing any other games with him, and I just stopped talking to him after that. It also helped that Mario and I weren't on the same team. Again, this is kind of like a good versus evil game, and I was just able to beat him. I was able to figure out who else was on my team based off of the social bonds that I had built up until that point, and we were able to easily secure a victory against Mario. The only problem was Mario had the assassin role. So if you're not already familiar with Avalon, there's typically one player on the good team that knows the entirety of the good team, and they are like the strongest role in the game. But if the good team wins, then the evil team's assassin gets to try to pick out who is the leader of the good team, and if they can guess correctly, then the evil team wins instead. The crazy thing is, I won without knowing who the captain of the good team was. Myself, Nick, Eric, and Craig were all on the same team together, and that's basically all I needed to know because I could trust those people, and with the four of us, we could complete all of the missions and have the good team win. The leader of our team was actually Chargestone, and I didn't even realize that at the time, and it was kind of a weird move by Chargestone to never let us know that he was the good team leader, but actually let the evil team know. And the idea behind that, I guess, was that Charge wanted to go to the deathmatch. So what wound up happening was the evil team won, and then Cam and Beans, being on the evil team, still had control over who the first deathmatch participant was. So again, they chose Eric, and Eric then chose Charge as the only player that kind of wasn't in our core alliance. This game was black and white yet again, and for the first time, Eric finally lost a deathmatch, finally met his match in Chargestone. Charge was able to take it and finally eliminate Eric from the game. This game had sort of a rock, paper, scissors dueling element to it, though this time in a way that more forced the players to duel. Players would choose to go to specific rooms, and then they would be quarantined off, unable to talk to people outside of that room, and then having to duel somebody that they were stuck in there with. So everybody submitted the rooms that they wished to go to, and then this was posted into the Main Match 7 announcements channel. So if you think this is weird, it is because it is. This is Mario Man posting as the host of the org. And I actually had my suspicions that Mario was actually secretly the host the entire time. I didn't really want to lead on too far in this video because I didn't want to spoil it, but we're going to go back now and look at some of the potential clues. Only Chargestone and I were actually on Discord at the time this happened, so we were the only two that saw it, and Charge was a little bit confused about what was happening, but having worked with Mario the entire game, I knew something was up. The host basically tried to play it off like it was Mario making a joke or something, but I knew that wasn't the case. Charge actually thought it was a joke and that Mario was trolling. Permissions were often misset. The fact that we could even type in that channel was a mistake. That's supposed to be a channel only for the host. Even if you look at this image at the top of it, there's another mistake. Magic attack crossed off, defense counts as defending, and that was edited, and I put some question mark reactions on that. There were a lot of mistakes. It was a messy experience, as I kind of hinted at throughout the whole process, but this was the biggest mistake of all of them. One of the players was secretly the host the whole time, and they accidentally let it slip. After this, I went into my confessionals channel and I typed in, I think the jig is up. And that was the last message ever sent in the Battle of Wits, the Genius Discord server. After this, in embarrassment, the host deleted the Discord server completely. And I'll never know some of what was going on here, as I never heard from the host or Mario Man ever again. And I don't know, was Mario the same person as Mario Man, or did Mario quit? And then in order to kind of preserve the integrity of the games, the host stepped in as a new Mario Man at that point. I'm really not sure. Here's what I do know, doing some further investigation myself. First thing I should say is at the start of this org, there were some quits. I don't actually remember exactly what happened, but some of the players would go to the death matches, but then not actually play them out after they were selected to do so. So kind of muddied that a little bit in the retelling, but it is important to note that some other players did quit before Mario left the game. And because of that, some people are potentially sympathetic to the host and think that maybe Mario was also a quit, and then the host tried to cover that up by assuming the role of Mario Man themselves. But here's what I'll tell you. The host of our org also had originally played in an org themselves. And right before they posted an advertisement for BOW to Reddit, Mario joined that Discord server as a spectator. Mario didn't say too much and did actually have one interaction with Spoon posted here, but most of Mario's messages on that server were concerning hidden game information that the spectators didn't have access to. And Spoon was actually doing pretty well in this org until there was a mistake in the 4th main match, which caused it to have to be restarted because the host accidentally revealed too much information. Following this, Spoon actually quit that org, and Mario stopped talking in it. So maybe Spoon was just trying to fill in for Mario once he quit, but I'm less sympathetic to that idea considering the fact that Spoon himself actually quit in his previous org. Either way, we'll never know who's the same person between Mario, Mario Man, and our host Spoon. But I think, having worked with Mario on basically every single game in that org, I think they were the same person the entire time. Mario was very chaotic, wanted to make use of these game mechanics that didn't really make sense, but the host maybe thought that they made sense, but had just balanced them incorrectly. And both of those things kind of point in the same direction. Somebody that isn't really good at balancing games and puts in things that are just overcosted, and then somebody that sees those overcosted things and get excited, well, both of those people are just bad at games, and that's why you cheat. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. This person wasted a bunch of time of my life with a game that didn't really mean anything because there was somebody in the game that was cheating. And so it was a really frustrating experience. I didn't really like Mario Man because they had done that move that made absolutely no sense in order to send me to the deathmatch, and I certainly don't like a host of an org that was lying to me for a whole bunch of time. So there you go, no real need to sugarcoat it, screw them. There are some differences that maybe make them seem like different people. Mario was loyal, whereas once he became Mario Man, he wasn't. But as somebody that worked with him the whole time, I think that he was the same person as well as being the host. And the through line were somebody that immediately understood the games as soon as they got posted, but had a very shallow understanding of the games that didn't really delve that deep and then never really evolved throughout the game. It's like somebody had known about the game for a long time, but wasn't really good at games, and so they had to cheat. They wouldn't get confused over basic stuff, which is pretty common, to forget the price of a game piece or to just get two items mixed up, but they wouldn't be able to develop sound strategies with all of the information that they had. And that's despite the fact that this person designed the games themselves. Now, I don't want to be too rough. I think it is probably just a kid, but they did waste a ton of my time. If you go back through the story, there are a few Easter eggs that I threw in there that kind of point at what's to come. And I was thinking of originally telling people to just like rewatch this video and listen for the moments where something doesn't seem quite right, but I'll just go over some of those now. So the first thing is that in the first main match, there was a mistake, and that mistake was resolved with Mario just then getting a more advantageous starting deck. So there's still a few different potential things that could have happened here. Either it was a mistake that they then corrected in their own favor, or they were potentially like trying to lie and then bailed themselves out by having the host make a mistake. It is also interesting to note that deck 12, I think if you don't quite understand what's going on in the game, might seem like a decent deck because you've got a paper, a scissors, and a rock. So if you have the perfect information and always are going to be able to know what your opponent is going to play because you're the host and you're cheating, well then you always have a viable submission. So it could just be they initially thought that deck 12 was the best and also made a mistake, and then after I kind of solved the game, realized that deck 11 was going to be a little bit better. The second main match, I've already brought up this point enough, but just to like explain exactly what was going on there, the cost to point ratio was almost 1-to-1 in terms of what you paid and what you received in this game. So paying $2 got you 2 points on the scoreboard for the most part. The items that disrupted your opponents costed way more than that. It would be like $5 to only take away 1 or 2 points. So it really just didn't make sense. But if you have a better understanding about when your opponent might make a bigger purchase, potentially because you have some insider information, potentially because you are the host of the org and cheating the entire time, that might make you a little bit more willing to go for these more splashy, disruptive plays. Don't have anything to say about the third game, though for the fourth game, I think I did some creative storytelling here to kind of disguise this fact, but Mario failed to submit in round 2, which was the exact same time that the host was also unavailable due to a personal reason. So both of them were actually inactive at the same time pretty early on. And then main match 5 is the one that Mario flipped on me. And I think that this potentially makes more sense if Mario's the host. Now, Mario had become Mario Man at this point, so we knew that they were, we know that this is the host now regardless, but I think that if there is a player in your org that is dominating more than you are while you are cheating, that's pretty embarrassing. So a move that you could potentially make to get me out of your org who is outperforming you, I think actually makes more sense in hindsight, even if it does blow up your alliance and get rid of a very straightforward win. Mario also acted on clues that didn't make sense. This was like the logic puzzle that we only had pieces to, but even with the information that we had, it was still flawed logic, but it was logic that somehow made sense to the person that wrote it, which was also Mario. And then going into Avalon, of course, the host puts himself in the role where the only thing that you need to win is figure out which of the other players has a specific role, which he knew because he gave it to him. This is also where I was pretty convinced that something fishy was going on with Mario. That is why I resent him the chess game. I wanted to see if he would be able to complete it, to see if he was the same person, and this is the biggest evidence that Mario wasn't Mario Man and that Mario initially was a different player that maybe just got bored and quit, but ultimately I think it was probably just the same person that lost track of their browser or was playing on multiple different devices. And then main match 7, we're back here, the jig is up, and that's it. That's the full story of my first time playing in an online reality game. Hopefully the Gambit game goes a little bit differently and none of the players are also secretly the hosts and cheating the entire time. That's not going to be the case. Don't worry about that. There's a whole bunch more sweet drama, tactics, betrayals, and a lot less cheating in the Gambit game to come. But for today, that's going to be it for me. So thank you guys very much for watching. I'm No Lux Given. Peace.